virtual Virtual Library Laureates, brought to you by Friends of the San Francisco Public Library in partnership with SPUR and the Terner Center for Affordable Housing at UC Berkeley. I am Marie Ciepiela, Executive Director of Friends of the Library. Friends of the Library is famous for its annual event, Library Laureates, which features authors throughout the Bay Area. Our virtual edition continues this tradition with greater reach through free events to audiences across the city and even the country. Engaging with books and writers brings the library into the center of discussion, learning, and grappling with significant issues in our community. As we endured and now emerge from COVID, we find ourselves asking questions about how the jolting year of 2020 changed us. What has become more clear to us? Has the experience changed our will to address longstanding injustices and problems? Can we take advantage of opportunities from the last year and reimagine a new way to move forward to create the city and the communities that we want? Tonight, we take on one issue of many, affordable housing, and do so in the library spirit of open exchange and dialogue. We're excited to bring you a unique hour of conversation with two experts who have spent the balance of their professional lives thinking about and proposing solutions to one of the most intractable problems in California. As you can imagine, this is not an easy task. Randy Shaw and Carol Galante have spent a lot of time proposing practical policy changes for the use of public land, preserving rental housing, a greater role for nonprofits in building, tenant protection, zoning laws, and most practically, building more housing. In many panels that Randy and Carol have been in the past, not much has changed. But as we emerge from COVID with a renewed focus on racial equity and income inequality, suddenly many of their ideas and recommendations are appearing everywhere. There isn't a day that the paper does not have a story about a new affordable housing project, the Sunset and SOMA, for most recently, the infusion of funding to address homelessness, and debates over zoning and density in cities throughout the Bay Area. Our conversation tonight is very well timed for Randy and Carol to tell us more about national and local developments. But first, let me introduce your speakers. Carol Galante is the I. Donald Terner Distinguished Professor in Affordable Housing and Urban Policy and the Faculty Director of the Terner Center of Housing Innovation. She also co-chairs the Policy Advisory Board of the Fisher Center of Real Estate and Urban Economics. As Faculty Director for the Terner Center, Carol Galante oversees the center's work and co-leads the center's research agenda, supervising projects that identify, develop, and advance innovative solutions in local, state, and federal housing policy. Professor Galante teaches graduate courses on housing policy and community development and is the author of many journal articles and is considered one of the most effective advocates for affordable housing legislation in California. Randy Shaw is the author of Generation Priced Out, Who Gets to Live in the New Urban America, re-released recently by the University of California Press 2020. It offers specific strategies for cities seeking to improve affordability for working and middle-class residents, telling powerful stories of tenants, politicians, homeowner groups, developers, and activists in over a dozen cities impacted by the national housing crisis, challenging progressive cities to reverse rising economic and racial inequality. Randy Shaw is the founding and current executive director of the Tenderloin Housing Clinic and is the genius behind Beyond Cron, and he also founded the Tenderloin Museum. Randy's other books include The Tennis Activist Handbook and The Tenderloin Sex, Crime, and Resistance in the Heart of San Francisco. So before we turn it over to Carol and Randy, I want to provide sort of the rules of how this is going to go. Randy and Carol will conduct a conversation with themselves without a moderator. After about 30 minutes, they themselves will select questions from the Q&A. So if you have questions, please submit your questions in the Q&A. The chat will be active, but the panelists will not be looking at the chat at all, and they won't respond to anything in the chat. So if you have a question, make sure it's in the Q&A. We understand that we all have different opinions and passions, and we ask that everyone remember the library spirit of learning, open minds, and peaceful exchange in the chat. With that, here are Carol and Randy.
Thank you, Marie, and thank the Library Laureates for hosting this great event. And so we'll just get right to it. And we're in a new political environment. There's a lot of people feeling more hopeful than ever before, really. And Carol, what do you see as the basis for this optimism, and do you share it?
I do share the optimism, Randy. And first of all, I just have to say it's great to be here to be able to do this with you. And maybe when this is over, can you teach me to write a book? Because I don't know how you do all you do and write these fabulous books at the same time. So I really appreciate being here with you. But I would say, the reason I'm optimistic is, first of all, we've had such a difficult few years, and then you put the pandemic on top of that, and you put the murder of George Floyd on top of that. And I think I have to say, out of this, just like depths of despair and kind of crisis that we've been in for, a while, um, I think what we're seeing is we've just everybody in the country has been now exposed to how unequal, um, you know, wealth is and how unequal income is. And just the mistreatment of Black and Brown people, and it's generated a reckoning. I really think that's the only way to put it. And so I'm hopeful because this new administration in Washington, D.C., the Biden-Harris administration, I am just so impressed with their thoughtfulness about how to take the crisis moment and deal with the emergency and the crisis, but then use it as a way of building upon longer and bigger reforms. And so I see just the Congress passing all the emergency, just stick with housing, right? The Congress passing all the emergency rental assistance money that they did. And, I was in the administration in the Obama years during the last crisis. And, we thought 800 billion was a lot of money, and we didn't get a lot in housing. We got some. And then you think about how important it is to keep people in place. I mean, this, Randy, more than anybody else, like during this kind of crisis. And I think the federal government really stepped up. Now we've got some implementation problems, which we can get to. What am I worried about? Uh, but monumental decision to say we're going to do the unemployment insurance. We're going to give people stimulus checks. We're going to get money in people's pockets, and we're going to have an eviction moratorium, and we're going to have emergency rental assistance. I mean, that's a good place to start. And then now we're building, the HUD budget. Proposed HUD budget just came out. It's a 15% increase, which is unheard of in the entire time I was at HUD. It got cut every year. All our whole job was trying to, maintain the level of assistance that was available to people, in a budget cutting environment, not try to do very much innovative and creative. And there's so much on deck at the federal level with the infrastructure plan and the family plan, all of this stuff now may not all get done, but I do believe even if the entire infrastructure plan didn't get done, we're going to see some substantial increases in resources and thoughtfulness about how to use those funds maybe differently than we've done in the past. So that gives me a tremendous amount of optimism.
What I find for people like us, Carol, who've been in the field for 40 years, which is a long time, and we go to a million, we're always talking about policies and strategies, but we have never had the money. And in America, when a problem goes unsolved, like homelessness for 40 years, people make assumptions like, well, I guess those guys' ideas didn't work. Well, no, our ideas worked, but we never had the money to scale them up to deal with the number of population. I mean, we never had a president come forward like Joe Biden with this level of funding. And in California, it's often forgotten that we went decade after decade with not spending money on housing. as if affordable housing wasn't a problem in California. When people wonder, why does California have the worst homeless and housing crisis? Well, our state ignored the problem. And that was true under Democratic governors and Republican governors. And so for Gavin Newsom to come out with this Project Home Key and really put in serious money for the first time, that's new for California. And whereas San Francisco, where maybe some of the listeners tonight are from, we've been able to, we're a wealthy city, we've been able to have local bond measures that voters are regularly approved, but a lot of the state doesn't have any money. And if there's not, and when the federal money disappears and the state money's gone, there's no way to deal with affordable housing. So we're seeing both in California and really in many other states. You know, I write in my book about Massachusetts. There's been great progress in Massachusetts to get zoning changes all across America, Seattle and Portland, Seattle and you know, Washington and Oregon, I should say. It was just a big
Minneapolis.
today. Yeah. Minnesota, Minneapolis. I mean, all across the country, we're finally putting the resources into housing that we have not done in the past.
Well, we're putting the resources into housing, but I also think we are, and you mentioned zoning, you know, we're also thinking about it differently, like the carrots and the sticks. You know, you need the money. There's no doubt you need the money, but you also need some different processes and different ways of getting cities to actually, you know, open up their single family zoning. Like no, who talked about that, you know, a few years ago, you know, like unheard of. I don't know, maybe you talked about it a long time ago, but
my book talks about it, and it talks about, it identifies all these activists who are pushing for things that essentially be passed in Cambridge and Minneapolis. I really was very down on Berkeley in the book, but look what Berkeley's now done and moving in a different direction. You know, Portland, even as they've gotten rid of single family zones, Seattle, incredible progress. There's still the problem though, for all the progress, a city like Los Angeles, which has the worst homeless crisis and the worst affordability crisis in the United States, 72% of their land is still single family zoned. And you know, that term single family zoning and exclusionary zoning, which is a big part of my book, Generation Priced Out, you know, a lot of people say, Randy, why are you so into zoning? Why are you always talking about zoning? You're a tenants' rights advocate. And I say, because you can't build apartments in most of these cities because the zoning doesn't allow it. So if you have unlimited money in Los Angeles, you're very limited where you can build housing that's affordable because apartments are banned.
absolutely. You know, and I just saw a question in the chat box, you know, is the lack of money really an excuse, you know, that some, you know, wealthy white communities use? And, you know, I guess, you know, my view would be, yes, maybe sometimes they do use it as an excuse, but let's be clear. If you want to reach people at the very lowest income levels, right, you're going to need a subsidy. You can't build it cheap enough. You can be more innovative in how you build it. I'm a big fan of modular building, you know, and things like that. But at the end of the day, if people can't afford $500 a month, you can't operate a property for less than $500 a month, you know, the maintenance, and so you do need subsidy. But I do believe you also need these other, you need the full range of housing resources, right?
Well, you know, because my organization, Terner Center, is a major provider of housing for homeless single adults in San Francisco. I've been dealing with homelessness a long time, and the most frustrating thing that keeps being recycled is people say, well, we spend X dollars, here's our homeless budget, and here's the homeless on the street. And if you divide it, it means we're spending X dollars per person. They don't realize that what we call the homeless budget is really an affordable housing budget. We have people in our hotels who live there 15, 20 years, and every year their rent gets, they're not homeless. They haven't been homeless for 20 years, but their rent subsidy is part of the homeless budget. So there's a lot of confusion. And again, as I said earlier, that when a problem in America or anywhere isn't solved for so long, people want to make a suit. Well, we tried to throw money at it. I mentioned in Los Angeles, they passed they passed a sales tax increase, this Prop HHH, which was promised to house 10,000 homeless people, okay? At the time it passed, there were 60,000 homeless people in Los Angeles. I can't tell you the backlash that's come in against that ballot measure on the grounds, supposedly, that proponents said it would end homelessness. And now we're only getting 7,000 units. Well, it was never going to end homelessness. But now there's a backlash against funding homeless stuff in Los Angeles because it didn't solve the problem. And so there's a lot of unrealistic assessments and false assessments, and we're constantly dealing with that. And that's been a struggle around that issue. I saw, just to mention a question I see about that I'll get to now, from that talks about, I am involved in trying to get the city to acquire hotels. And I've sent them a lot of hotels, and that is going to happen in San Francisco. So what people talk about, you can not only build housing for affordability, but you can acquire it. And there is a lot of tourist hotels that are available now. The city, I think, should have seized them by now, but they are starting very aggressively to do so. And you'll be hearing about that in the days and weeks ahead.
Yeah, I mean, Randy, maybe you could just stick on this topic for a minute, because, you know, one of my comments was we can put more money into the problem, but we also need to think differently. And so one of the ways of thinking differently is like this Project Home Key, where you're buying hotels. You do need long-term operating subsidy of some kind, but you also don't need to house every person in a affordable housing development that costs $800,000 to build from the ground up. Do you agree with me on that? And that we should be focused on, again, not just for homelessness, but more generally for, you know, trying to think about converting some of the older office buildings that maybe, you know, given working from home, you know, all the old retail sites, commercial corridors, there's got to be more assets that can be converted less expensively than building brand new from the ground up. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that people often overlook, is that there has to be a variety of approaches and not a single strategy. And I've always been a supporter, and I am in Generation Priced Out. You know, some progressives think market rate housing is evil, but in fact, market rate housing in cities like San Francisco, 25% of the units are affordable, and it doesn't cost the city a dime to build them. So why would you be against that? We have vast stretches of the western side of San Francisco. You could build, the city for no money, for free, could get literally thousands of affordable units if they allowed 8-story buildings, which is the zoning in my Tenderloin. The residential zoning is 8 stories, which we propose, and that's, so I don't consider a 6-story building a high rise, but it, you know, same thing with Berkeley and other cities that have inclusionary laws. Yet you see opposition to that by people who identify as political progressives, and that is a real mistake, because then you're limiting it to only 100% affordable housing, and some of these progressives don't support changing the zoning. So you can't even build affordable housing in most neighborhoods in Los Angeles, San Francisco, currently, even now in Berkeley, before they change the law. So that's a big problem. New York City is having a big debate right now about their affluent neighborhoods like Soho and Kiwanis and Brooklyn, that they want to upzone, and that so they can bring affordable housing. And they're having some success there, which I think is great. But we could do that throughout the Bay Area if everyone realized that we can't just build 100% affordable housing as the solution.
So where does that, you know, that progressive view come from? And, you know, how do we think about, you know, breaking through, you know, going back to the redlining and the urban renewal that was done in the 60s, and all the federal, frankly, but, you know, state and local embraced policies that created, you know, segregated single family communities. And, you know, they are now zoned, you know, 90% single family. How do you convince people that it's not only possible, but the right thing to do to?
Well, I'll tell you about that, Carol, because I talk in my book about Berkeley's legendary neighborhood preservation ordinance that passed in 1973 that was seen as when I came to Berkeley in 74, everyone was talking about the neighborhood preservation ordinance. And it sounded great and progressives were all for it because it preserved neighborhood from urban renewal and demolition. But as I describe in Generation Priced Out, what Berkeley's neighborhood preservation ordinance really did was twofold that is really destructive. It said, you know what, we're going to let homeowners decide what gets built in their neighborhood. And I would describe that as the single biggest problem with the housing, causing the housing crisis in America, is that we've given homeowners the ability to say, I don't want an apartment built. Because obviously homeowners profit from restricting supply. We let them veto projects and the political clout they use with representatives. And we've set up these incredibly labyrinthine approval processes. So you have projects in San Francisco that you apply for in 2014, you don't even get a hearing at the Planning Commission for 2 or 3 years. It's not even assigned to a planner for 6 months. So it discourages people from building because they can't predict where the economy is going to be. And what I sort of showed in my book on Berkeley is that the real motive for the neighborhood preservation openness was, quote, stopping ticky-tack apartments. Well, those ticky-tack apartments are where the UC Berkeley janitors would be living, where the food service workers would be living, instead of having to live in Sacramento and commute for an hour. Because if you work in Berkeley now, you can't afford to live in the city.
Yeah.
Because we didn't build ticky-tack apartments.
I do have to say, you know, this is not a defense of that kind of preservation ordinance, but if you walk through neighborhoods of Oakland and San Francisco, and Berkeley that had built some of those ticky-tack apartments before the change, they're pretty butt ugly. And you know, this was the architecture of the 60s and early 70s, you know, just stucco, aluminum frame windows. It's not really about density because they're not that dense. But then when you see other multifamily that's done in a, you know, the bungalow courts, you know, the things like that that are that can integrate from a design perspective into single family neighborhoods, but aren't so jarring in terms of their difference of, you know, architectural style or even just frankly cheap quality things.
Well,
You know, so
bad design is a problem with any kind of zoning or anything.
Yep.
There are badly built buildings, and you know, one of the things that happened in San Francisco, and you might remember, Carol, in the 1980s, there were all these Richmond specials where single-family homes are torn down and cheap, ugly-looking fourplexes, sixplexes are put up. Okay, so what we should do is, what San Francisco should have done as a response, is stop those ugly buildings from being built. Instead, what they did was downzone the Richmond, and basically, for the last 40 years, there hasn't been very many apartments built in the entire Richmond neighborhood. You know, that was not the proper response to bad design. So, you know, there's always too often design that was used as a way just because they don't want, you know, even the good design they wouldn't want.
Right. But this is where it gets tricky, you know, because I do think when you, just like when people think about the Pruitt-Igoe towers in St. Louis, that's what they think of as public housing. That's not what public, you know, you could still have public housing. It doesn't have to, you know, look like that. You could still have multifamily apartments in, you know, more mixed density neighborhoods that fit in and look good. It's just, you've got to think about how to do that well. And, you know, that takes brain power that nobody wants to put into it, I guess. I'm not sure.
You know, one of the debates that's going on now is whether to eliminate single-family zoning and allow fourplexes. You know, Portland allowed sixplexes, and Minneapolis allowed triplexes, and Berkeley will allow fourplexes. But when San Francisco, Raphael Mandelman, supervisor, introduced a measure, he said, look, Raphael made a great point. He said, we're building all these monster homes, which aren't very architecturally now, you know, these giant monster homes.
Right.
Why don't we use that same lot and the same size you can build a monster home, go to fourplex, which will be cheaper per unit. Will they be will be affordable? No, but they'll be a lot cheaper, the 600,000 instead of 3 or 4 million. And last I heard, he only had one other sponsor for the bill. So in progressive San Francisco, fourplexes are treated as if Pruitt-Igoe is coming to the neighborhood. And that's the problem with the progressive. That's what my book is really about, is how these progressive blue cities have policies that prevent middle class and working class people from living there, because they don't do things like this.
And so again, do you have ideas about how you can break that, how you can educate? You know, I mean, I feel like, I'll just say, The Color of Law, for example, I think as a book really helped open people's eyes to how racist these policies were when they were created, how many places, including Los Angeles, were downzoned, like Berkeley had the preservation thing, that, you know, for a variety of reasons. But like, how do we figure out how to move the tide? I mean, what we have going on now is we've got some places like Berkeley that have, you know, kind of had a change of heart. And I think that's a part of the times, you know, the reckoning, the awakening. And then we also have folks, YIMBYs and others at the state level, you know, trying to say to communities, you know, you have to do this, you know, maybe you can do it with some level of flexibility, but kind of taking that local control away. Do you think taking that local control away is the right way to go?
Well, I absolutely do. And because local control we didn't think that worked very well in Birmingham in the 1950s and 60s. We didn't support local control, and it's racist. And that's what's happening now, especially, and I keep getting back to the fact that the people who are preventing apartments from being built, the reason home prices keep going up in these cities so much is because they artificially restrict supply. So there's an economic motive to not let housing be built, and it's against society's values. It's terrible for climate change because it requires long commutes. We have, you know, so many people commuting from Sacramento to almost 200,000 people before the pandemic were commuting from Sacramento to the Bay Area because they couldn't live any closer that they could afford. But what I say in Generation Priced Out is the best argument, I think, for fourplexes are seniors who want to stay in their neighborhoods but don't want to have that big house anymore, and they want to be, or they want, you know, so they want to move to a fourplex, but they can't live in North Berkeley because there aren't any fourplexes available, for example. You know, they can't live in North Beach because they can't. So if we built more fourplexes, it would create more options for seniors, and also for seniors who want to be near their families, because I think what's helping us in San Francisco is a lot of the families are realizing that they're never going to see their grandkids because they can't afford to live anywhere near them. So if we want to be our family connectivity and deal with just seniors, and the AARP has been very supportive,
Yes,
of increasing density, because the AARP recognizes that seniors need more housing options.
yes, and you know, I have to say, to the local control versus state, the, you know, accessory dwelling unit state law really opened up, you know, the ability to build more granny flats and add-ons for you know, small units. And you've seen, you know, you've seen accessory dwelling units take off substantially as a result. So, you know, having that kind of top-down approach, you know, can make a difference. And, you know, there's still some design review and things like that, but yeah, it does make a big difference. One of the arguments I made in front of the state legislature when the ADU legislation was going through was, you know, I actually did an analysis of, you know, just census data, really simple stuff, of how many people lived in these certain census tracts in these single family neighborhoods in the 1970s versus how many people live in those houses today, you know. And the underutilization of the single family house has, you know, has clearly become a thing as there are less children, less, you know, nuclear families, you know, living in those single family homes. You can not have that many more people, if any more people than lived there in 1970. You just have them in 2 or 3 homes as opposed to one mega home.
You mentioned 1970, and I talk in the book about Los Angeles, but I have a long chapter on it. Los Angeles has had a million more people since 1970. A million more people. They had a massive immigrant wave, but they didn't say, gee, our population's exploding. We have to change our zoning. Single family zoning doesn't work. No, they just cram people living in garages. The commutes are mind-bogglingly destructive in Los Angeles because they don't build housing. They don't rezone. Even today, as we speak, the zoning is the same restrictive zoning it was in 1955. So, I mean, they haven't, cities have to change, and then they don't. You have to deal with the state because climate change isn't local. Climate change affects the whole area. I did notice that somebody had a question about something is a really big issue for me and the big issue in my book, which is, should poor people be concentrated in one area or mixed in various? And that's why I mentioned Soho, the Gowanus Canal. I have a story in my book about Nolita in New York City. We can't have these segregated neighborhoods, both on income and race. And zoning is used to accomplish both. Yet San Francisco is progressive and LA is very progressive. All these places, Denver, they're all very progressive, but we have communities entirely segregated by class and race. And when you try to bring affordable housing into those neighborhoods, resistance is fierce, as we're seeing in the Sunset right now. But that's what true progressives, I think, have to push for, is to increase affordable housing in affluent neighborhoods, because it also provides a higher opportunity for the families there. We can't be ghettoizing the poor, which is happening too much in the United States.
Yeah, people need to have the choice for sure, of where to live, and that doesn't mean that everybody gets to live in a $5 million house, but we've got to have more options available for people. So I do know we need to, I think, open this up to look at some of these questions here, Randy. We could keep on riffing all day long, I'm sure, but do you want to take a crack at one of these?
Well, I think we've had some really good questions because they get the fact that it's not just money, but that's really what we have an opportunity here to change the dialogue for the first time in 40 years. And I mean that for over, really, since the mid 1970s, the United States has gotten out of the affordable housing business. We're talking about almost 50 years. And we find, when people keep saying, well, the money must be there, well, it's going to the defense budget, not to the housing budget. And we have an opportunity for the very first time to have enough money to make a meaningful difference in both reducing homelessness and increasing affordability. And, many people are surprised when I always say that only 25% of eligible households for federal assistance get that assistance today. 25%.
Right.
Well, it needs to be closer to 100%.
Yeah, I mean, look, my view is part of it is income, right? People, wages have not kept up with housing prices. Incomes have not kept up. And so you definitely need to put more money in people's pockets some way. You can put more money in their pocket through a renter's tax credit. You can put more money in their pocket through a voucher. You can put more money in their pocket through a child care credit, so they can afford more housing. But at the same time, it's going to continue to be out of reach unless you actually add to the supply to, the whole supply demand issue. At the end of the day, you need more supply too, as you help subsidize people at the very low end.
I think everyone listening should realize, like, my book came out the hardback came out in November, paperback with a new preface came out in 2020. And even between the hardback and the paperback, a lot of positive things happened. 100% affordable housing overlay in Cambridge and now Berkeley. We're having success in Seattle. So much is positively happening. And I think a lot of us are get frustrated because it seems so obvious we need to do the things that you and I have just been talking about. But when you have a system that's been in place as long as the single family home system has been in place, you don't change it overnight. And so we're actually making very good progress, and it's not at the pace that we want, but I think we're moving in the right direction in most places. Massachusetts used to have a law, which many cities have. It's hard to believe. Colorado has the same law, that a city cannot increase their zoning for housing without a supermajority council vote. Now, why would you have a supermajority council vote to increase housing? You don't have it for, it's not a democracy. So finally, that bill got through, some great work and people in Massachusetts, and Colorado's had success in getting things changed. So, the state level has been opened up really for the first time in really 40 or 50 years in the recent years. So I'm optimistic that there's between the federal and the state and increasing in local, we're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, I do too. There's a question here that is unanswerable, but I want to ask it to both of us anyway. So, which is, is there the right balance between building affordable housing and market rate housing, to effectively, shift the, I'm rephrasing it a little bit, but to effectively, shift the housing prices or the rental prices. And I would say, it's really hard to create a mathematical way of looking at this. The way I think we have tended to look at it is, as a place creates new population, whether from job growth or immigration or, children, forming their own, growing up and forming their own households, you've got to keep up with the household formation. And we are so far behind having kept up with that household formation that, we have a deep amount of work to do to build more, to get to any kind of balance. And one thing I would say is, you saw in the pandemic when everybody left San Francisco, I think pretty temporarily, but we could see what your view on that is, Randy. Who's coming back and who's leaving for good. But you did see rents drop, significantly, and you did see vacancies go up significantly. And this is an example of, demand left and you had more supply, and so prices adjust. Now, I think, as I said, and I think the data is starting to show this, that we're already climbing back. Rents are already starting to climb back, even in San Francisco, but certainly in places like Oakland and Walnut Creek.
Carol, you just made a great point that I want to amplify, and I hope everyone listening remembers this, if nothing else, in this talk tonight, which is that you cannot continue to add the level of middle class and upper middle class jobs in San Francisco and not build housing for those workers. So when I hear progressive members of the Board of Supervisors say, we've already built enough market rate housing, we only need affordable housing, I say, where are those people who are working in those banks and tech firms and real estate companies and law offices? Where do you want them to live? If you don't want to build house, let them live in San Francisco, there's two things that'll happen. And I describe this in the book, how it works. They'll either outbid existing residents for units in San Francisco, driving up rents.
Exactly.
They'll evict tenants for owner move-in to take over their place or use the Ellis Act. Or they'll say, well, I guess I better buy a house in Sacramento or Fairfield and I'll just commute in, worsening climate change. So you can't create jobs for a sector and then say, but we're not going to provide any housing. Because that's what Silicon Valley did in the first dot-com boom, and it was a disaster. So that's what people should think about when they hear this mantra, we build enough market rate housing. Well, look, if you don't want to stop creating jobs for people who can't afford, don't qualify for affordable housing, that's one thing. But if you're going to create those jobs, which we do, you have to house people.
Well, and there's a whole group of people, that when you create all the tech jobs, let's just say the tech jobs, maybe they can afford and push people out. But the demand for the nurses and the teachers and, again, people who don't qualify for generally, don't qualify for subsidy. They can't afford the market, but they don't qualify for
it's mind-boggling that everybody wants to house teachers, nurses, whatever, and firefighters. That's always the categories, and yet we don't build housing for the population.
No, we don't.
Just to mention that I write about housing for beyondcron.org regularly, and you can follow me on Twitter at beyondcron. We're always talking about housing, and you learn a lot from that. I learn a lot just about housing because you learn about what's going on all over the country, because then you see what's happening, the progress, the reversals. And so those who are getting interested in hearing more can stay involved in this, because we need everyone to be involved and get involved in your neighborhood and support it. And it makes a difference. I always say in Berkeley, it used to be you go to a hearing and 80% of the people at that planning commission hearing would be white homeowners over 60. Students then got involved and the whole Berkeley politics changed. Students started coming down and saying, we want housing bill. Where are we going to live? Totally has changed the dynamic in Berkeley. And I don't think it's ever going back. And so you can make a difference. Same thing happened in Cambridge. I talk in my book how a guy named went to a hearing, spoke out for housing, and people came up to him and said, hey, that was great. He started a better Cambridge, and now he's head of Abundant Housing Massachusetts. So there's a lot more people, if you feel isolated, there's a lot more people who agree with you than you realize. Just find out how to get involved.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, we do see such energy, you know, in the YIMBY movement and the individual groups like you mentioned in Cambridge that come together from, you know, kind of one person deciding to really get involved here. And also, I think the importance of those who are advocating for more development, also working really closely with those advocating for more racial equity and more, you know, economic integration in neighborhoods. And so I think you're seeing those forces maybe joining together a little bit in a way that hasn't really happened before now. And, you know, I would just say, and I know we're going to need to wrap up here pretty soon, but if I had one last remark to make, it's that there's just a huge opportunity with all the money to also incentivize. So, you know, bring some carrots to communities. States already doing this with funding planning dollars, you know, and, you know, then wanting to hold communities accountable through their housing elements, you know, at the end of that. But they're bringing some resources to bear to help communities actually have the public engagement and create the right kinds of plans and the right kind of streamlined processes and things like that. And so I think between the state and the federal government resources that we could get there for carrots, you want your transportation dollars, you want your infrastructure dollars, well, you need to have some pro housing policies in place to demonstrate that you're going to have some balance between, you know, the jobs that are being created and the people who work in those jobs. And so I'm optimistic because I think we've got this opportunity where we do have some resources to put against this for the first time in a long time.
So people should come away from this feeling that hopeful for certainly there's more reason for optimism at every level, because the federal government has always been the leading agent for affordable housing. And what happened was when Richard Nixon decided to get us out of the public housing business, and then Ronald Reagan got us out of the rent subsidy business in 1981, we have a whole generation who's grown up never even assuming the federal government had any role. So it's always like, you know, why isn't Oakland doing more? Why isn't Berkeley or San Francisco or every city doing more? Well, they don't have the resources that the federal government has, the massive resources which we're now seeing coming forward from the Biden plans. And so it's been, like I say, a really just mind-boggling abandonment of a core. The housing to me has always been the foundation for everything, because if you're not housed, you're not going to be able to get your kids aren't going to do well in school. They're not going to have I wrote a report 20 years ago about the health crisis connected to housing. They're more likely to get asthma and to be sick. Housing is really the foundational element, which other countries understand, but we haven't. Now, hopefully we'll move in the right direction, but all of you listening need to help us make this happen. And I hope you'll try out my book, Generation Priced Out, because it lays out a lot of what we're talking about here.
Great, thanks, Randy. I think we're gonna turn it back over to Marie now to wrap things up.
Sure. Hi, I don't know if, oh, there you are. Well, thank you so much. You know, I see some questions in there I still want to ask. And I don't know if you have a bit of time, Randy, too. There was a really good question about the Houston zoning. I think that was in your book.
You know, it's funny about Houston, which everyone talks about, the great example of no zoning. There's a lot of issues around Houston, but I would say this, that it's clear to me that zoning has failed to produce affordability. The zoning god has failed, as you might say. It's the theory that we need to have zoning because we don't want a chemical plant next to a single family home. We can all agree on that. But the fact that it has become dominant strategy for racism and segregation on class and class differential, it just, people always say to me, God, I had such a great time in Europe. You know, it's so great. There's such an active street life. And I say, yeah, but all those cities, they don't have single family home zoning. Go through Paris. Everyone's loving Paris. They're all 6-story residential buildings, one after the other. Copenhagen,
Yeah.
all the cities we love, Berlin, but then when they come back home after being tourists, and it's like, stop that duplex, stop that fourplex. And so that to me is that zoning is way out of control. So people look at Houston and say, Houston hasn't done any worse. But I have a chapter in the book on Austin, and Austin tells you, here's a booming city, one of the biggest booming cities in America right now, and they have zoning that's based in the 1950s.
Yeah. Yeah. I can't remember which city it was in the book that you highlighted, but there was a term that one of the I think they were actually an elected official, but they used a term that I thought was so important. It was high opportunity neighborhood.
That was Austin, and
that to me, it just says it all, and it speaks to this, like, who can live in a forget the urban city as the title of your book, but we need to give people get to live in a high opportunity neighborhood. And can that be the focus, so that you get density, you get mix, and you put people, or you create more high opportunity neighborhoods. But that term stuck out for me, and it was Austin.
And just to mention, I think that was by Greg Cesar talking about Austin, because the mayor had a plan where he was going to put all the affordable housing on a major highway. And it's like, wait a minute. Yeah, we want affordable housing. We want a zone, but it shouldn't just be in the areas where no one can walk around.
Right.
We want to have affordable housing in high opportunity neighborhoods.
Right. And what is the status of isn't there something around Glen Park that Mandelman is working on, fourplexes around Glen Park? Is that something that's happening or not happening?
Well, I think my understanding is he's moving forward with it, but I don't believe the votes. We'll see if the votes are there when there's a final vote, but I think he only has one or so sponsors, which is a sad comment.
Yeah.
San Francisco can't have fourplexes.
Yeah, right by a BART station, because it's so right there. Yeah.
One thing, if I could just add on the fourplexes, as a response to a comment / question in the box here, which is, maybe we should do some demonstration projects, like literally. I'd love to see, and I can imagine us at UC Berkeley, doing some kind of, they have the a solar decathlon on the lawn of the White House, where, schools from all over the country build a, solar house. But, we could work with, a variety of universities to actually think about like really thinking about, how you could do this well and demonstrate to people. Not that we should stop moving on it while we're doing the demonstration, but I think you need those kind of tools to win over not just the minds, but the hearts of people.
I mentioned one thing about that. Patrick Kennedy, you may know, a builder who's built a lot in Berkeley and San Francisco. He did a model of a way to build very affordable homeless housing, and he put it on 9th Street in Mission, and gave everyone tours. And I thought it was great. Our tenants came by, they all loved it, but we couldn't get the zoning. He can't build them in much of the city because the zoning won't allow him.
Yeah. Got to marry those two things together.
Yeah. So, Randy, you told me a story, and I want to thank everyone for coming. But I wanted to ask you something about a library, and you told me a story about the Glen Park Library.
Yes,
It's my
I
neighborhood,
found
but
the article.
tell me about what happened with trying to build and to open the
Well,
Glen Park Library.
people know David Prowler, who was worked for Chinatown Community Development Center in the nonprofit sector. Then he worked for the city for a while, and he had this really good idea that he could he could become a developer himself, and he was going to build at his own expense, the developer's expense, a new Glen Park library with condos above. Well, that sounded good because, new Glen Park Library, right? Who'd be against that? Well, the San Francisco Bay Guardian at the time went ballistic because they claimed that Prowler was privatizing the library system. Because, they didn't think that a private person should build a library. That's the kind of mentality we get in San Francisco among too many progressive institutions. So
But it ended up happening, though.
it ended up happening, but it was a very different process, and the economics changed. But a lot of times those are the kind of creative ideas we say that we like when someone moves forward. And here's a guy who spent his whole life in the nonprofit sector, thinking he was doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Well, more recently, I would just say, like, again, an initiative that doesn't cost any money. The governor has started putting out excess state land to develop housing on, and vacant state office buildings in places. I mean, there's just a ton, this idea that we don't have the land. We have plenty of infill land. Much of it is public owned. Parking lots, not parking structures, parking lots. And back in the 80s, when I was at Bridge Housing, we did a deal in downtown Oakland. That was a joint effort between the nonprofit building affordable housing on the top and taking the parking lot and making it a parking garage for the city of Oakland. And these things are public-private partnerships, and they work.
I have to say that if anyone listening is told by a city official that there's no place to build in their city, send me an email, randy@thclinic.org, and I'll find where there's a site to build in that city.
Well, actually, interesting you should say that, because someone just put in the chat, can we get Randy and Carol's contact information? So Michael, who works for Friends, I don't know if you or Kim can put in the chat, but I put Friends, first of all, let me say Friends, SPL.org is the website for Friends of the San Francisco Public Library. You can see all of the staff's contact information in there. And if you go to the book tab, Randy's book is for sale through us, and it will get shipped to you. So maybe we could put in the chat, I don't know if you want your email in. Oh, Carol just did it. All right.
Great. I did.
Carol did it.
You can find it on the Berkeley website anyway, so.
And maybe it's Randy at THC?
Yeah, randy@thclinic.org. You got it there, right there.
Clinic. Oh, there you go. Okay. And then, yeah. So was there...
Always answer questions. Any thoughts people have, feel free to contact me. And again, I'm on Twitter at BeyondCron, so you can follow me there as well.
Thanks. Well, I think all of us will really be like, I am actually still amazed. I read the Chronicle every day, and I think that each of us will be much more, and as well as all sorts of online news, but this hyper local, because that's really where this I mean, I know there's now layers, and it's great nationally that it's finally getting this attention, but these local stories I'm finding them every single time I open the paper. Like you were in about Piedmont, Carol, just last week. Is the Sunset apartment building happening or not?
Oh, it's going to happen.
It's going to happen. That's what I thought. And that was announced, and the SOMA is going to get an enormous amount.
I think it's great the way that so many neighborhood residents are fighting for it. They're not just sitting back and letting the anti-housing people control the debate. And and YIMBY Action's done a great job there. And the folks, West Side groups, done a really great job. So It's essential to stay involved.
Great. Well, Thank you. I mean, if there's any last thing you want to say that you felt you want to add, it's been fantastic. I was really excited actually, because as long as you guys have been together, you actually hadn't met each other. So I feel like I did something by introducing you. And I didn't know that. But thank you. And to the audience, we are, we always talk about books. We'll always, support the library. That's the one way in which we do get political. Make sure you always vote for strong public libraries. But we are looking for having not only talking about books, but also major issues as we come out of COVID and looking. So if anyone has a suggestion on a topic that they would like us to facilitate and we can just serve as a discussion platform, I think this was really was great questions, lots of learning, and so we'd love to serve this role. So if you do have any suggestions of topics you'd like us to get experts and authors in the room for, just email us at info@spl.org. I don't know if somebody can write that in the chat, but thank you so much. And well, I'll be looking for the libraries to roll open, hopefully by the end of the summer in a limited capacity. But we're very lucky locally with a lot of public investment in our libraries, and I'm thank you so much for being our guest.
Thanks for having us.
Yes. All right.